that it'll be very special with Tommy preaching for you. You'll enjoy it. I don't know how many of y'all are history buffs. I hated history when I was in class. And maybe it was because, or when I was in school. And mainly that was probably because every history teacher I ever had was very weird, a leftover hippie, or just in general, they were the most boring monotone speakers I ever heard. And for some reason, when I got to college, I had something that caught my attention. Had a younger history teacher, but they were excited about history and they made it fun to learn. And I really hated it because it was just a one semester class. And I fell in love with history at that point in time. Now, I still don't watch a lot of History Channel or things like that, but I love learning new things about history. A couple of years ago, I was studying for a sermon that I was going to be doing, and for some reason, in the back of my mind, there was this name that kept haunting me, and I couldn't figure out who the person was and why I would know the person. And when I got to reading about them, I found out why that was stuck in my mind. I had apparently accidentally learned something in a history class at some point in time, and this name connected with me. His name is Hernando Cortez. Anybody know who Cortez is? He was one of those adventurers that decided to leave his homeland and go do something. He was a Spanish conquistador, and in 1519, he made a bold proclamation. He decided that he was going to this area of Mexico that was known as the richest area. The Aztecs were ruling that, and the Aztecs had been dominating for 6 centuries. People had gone to steal their riches. They dominated, took what those people had. And sometimes they would go after the people that had tried to invade them. Well, Hernando Cortez decided he wanted to be rich, he wanted to be famous, and the only way he knew to go do it is to go after the Aztecs. And so he took 11 ships with him, 500 men, 100 sailors, and they went out and they landed in Mexico on the shores of the Yucatan. And they were getting ready to confront the Aztecs at that point in time. And as they got off the ships and all the people are there on the shore, history tells us that Cortez looked at his people and said, "Burn the ships." Well, there was some grumbling and complaining because how are we going to get back? We brought 11 ships with us. How are we going to get back? If we survive this, we're going to take a lot of riches with us. We got to get back some way on things. So they were grumbling and started to complain against him. And he declared again, "Burn the ships." They started raising up. Okay, well, what if the Aztecs do to us like they've done everybody else? We need to be able to have access to our ships to jump on board and get back to Spain. And he declared a third time, "Burn the ships." But he finished it this time with this sentence. If we are going home, notice the if there. If we are going home, we're going home in their ships. That's quite a declaration. That basically was saying to his people, number one, it gave them a little bit of a sense of, hey, I believe in us. I believe in what we're going to do. Retreat is not an option. But more than anything else, Cortez was really saying to his people, it's all or nothing. You followed me here. Now it's all or nothing with what you're doing. We're burning our ships. We can't go back. Only choice is we survive, we take their riches, we get on their ships and leave. Or we die. It's all or nothing. He took away their option for failure because if you want to live, you better survive. Jesus did much the same thing. And that's why we're doing this series and we're looking at 4 different instances over these 4 weeks. Actually, it's going to be 5 weeks now because I believe Tommy's going to pick up and go with this also next week with us. So over the 5 weeks that we're doing this series, we're going to be looking at instances where Jesus looks at a group of people and every time their life situation was different or the requirements that Jesus gave them was different than what he had given somebody else when he said, "Follow me." We talked last week about how he went by Andrew and Peter, the 2 brothers that were working for Zebedee, and how he just said, "Follow me." And okay, maybe they didn't like their job, or maybe they were tired of fishing, or you know what, they didn't own the company. They were working for somebody else. It was easy to quit. But when they follow him and they walk down the shores just a little bit further and he calls out to James and John to follow me, that cost more because they had to quit their father and they hurt their father's business. There was a higher cost for James and John to follow Jesus than it was for Andrew and Peter at that time to do it. So when Jesus does this, he requires different things from each of us. Now, if we're going to be a whiny teenager about it, we could sit there and Candy could sit there and go, well, that's not fair. He didn't seem to require as much out of Norma as he does for me to follow. That's not fair. It's not quite right that does it. Phil's been down pastoring at a church for 15 years, and, there's been opportunities to go other places. He could look and see other friends have had other opportunities that were maybe bigger opportunities. Well, that's not fair. But when Jesus calls us, he calls us for our circumstances and where he is desiring to take us. And it never seems to follow the exact same path. I confess to y'all things all the time. And when I was called to preach, I was actually called to preach when I was 12 years old. But an adult that talked to me said, you were just at church camp. It really didn't mean anything. So it wasn't until I was around 16, 17 that I really started. I actually had a pastor at 15 say, well, maybe it did mean something. So here, I want you to preach one Wednesday night for us. And that was the first time I ever preached. And it was around 16, 17 that I really acknowledged that I was called to preach. Well, within a few years, God brings friends into my life like Phil and a couple of others. And I hear them preach, and all of a sudden there's like loud booming voices and all this stuff. And I got up to teach. And somebody told me, one day you'll learn to preach because you teach a lot. But I would turn down chances to go preach because I thought I don't do it right. I don't do it like everybody else. And I had to learn that God sometimes calls us for different reasons, for different paths to do things. His call to follow me is not going to look the same for each one. Shared a book with Tommy that's just on speaking styles and things like that. And I told him, listen, you do what God lays on your heart. You be that, because God doesn't want another Jeff Jones. He's got Jeff Jones. He wants somebody else. So what does that call to follow me look like? We talked about this young man by the name of Matthew that was robbing his own people blind, taking up taxes for the Romans. And he wrote this historical document telling us about the life of Jesus and things that happened in that. And so we've been looking at Matthew for a lot of these instances of where Jesus says, follow me. And in Matthew chapter 8, verse 18 through 22, reads like this. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake, which just blows our mind because, a successful church and successful ministry means lots of people, right? Jesus saw a crowd and went the other way. Just blows our mind, doesn't fit our way of thinking. Verse 19 says, then a teacher of the law, which means this was one of the religious leaders, one of the people that was very knowledgeable about Scripture. The teacher of the law came to him and said, teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replied, with my favorite answer he gives in the entire New Testament. Because if I would have been sitting there, I would have been lost. Jesus replied, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. What a great answer. This guy comes up and says, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. And Jesus looks at him and goes, hey, you know what? Foxes have holes. Birds of the air have nests. This guy and probably everybody around him is going, what in the world is this dude talking about? And then he says that final part, which was hinting back to himself, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. What Jesus was saying is, if you choose to follow me, you're about to go on a journey. Your life's never going to be boring. When I have teenagers tell me at youth camps like we're staying down in Dixon, just drove up for church today. When I have kids tell me, but being a Christian's so boring, my initial response to them every time, I look them in the eyes and I say, you're doing it wrong then. You're not trusting Jesus. You just asked him into your heart for fire insurance, and that's all you ever did because you're scared of going to hell. You're not literally living for Jesus, because when you choose to follow Jesus, you're on a journey from then. And that's what Jesus was trying to tell this teacher of the law, this religious person that knew the Scriptures very well, probably more so than the other people that were gathered around Jesus at that point in time. And he's telling him, if you choose to follow me, you can never be settled again. From the moment you choose to go after me, your life is going to be topsy-turvy and maybe a little bit upside down. Every day of your life, you're listening for that call that says, now I want you to go do this. Now I want you to go do that. Something's different going to happen in your life. And I would dare to challenge you, sort of like I did at the end. I worded it maybe a little bit different at the end of service last week. But I want to challenge you, if you have felt settled in your Christianity. If you have felt settled in following Jesus, I want to challenge you to get closer to Jesus so you can hear what he's saying to you, because I don't think you're listening to him anymore. The moment you get settled, he's going to start calling you to go to that person that you don't want to go to. He's going to start calling you to go and do something that makes you feel uncomfortable. He's going to put you in situations that you just sat there, and before, if you would have thought about it, you would sit there and go, oh, I could never picture myself doing that. But he's teaching you to trust him. He's teaching you to build your faith, because the more you go after him, the more he's going to put you in these situations that you have to depend on him. I'm a visual person. So how many of y'all have ever seen the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? Love it. Oh, that's one of my all-time favorite movies. And mainly because of one scene in particular, of where he knows he has got to go somewhere, Indiana Jones does. And there's this big chasm there that he doesn't want to fall in. And all he knows is that hint, that riddle that he has to follow, tells him that he has to take steps of faith. Now, he doesn't show complete faith because of how he ends his little journey there. But his beginning is he takes his leg out, those of you who've seen it, and he steps out and the bridge starts forming underneath his foot. I love it because it is the perfect picture of what truly following Jesus is like. As I told you last week in my testimony, number one, even going back a little bit further, never would have pictured I would have been youth pastor at a church up in Westmoreland, Tennessee. Never thought I'd be teaching in Westmoreland, Tennessee. Never thought I would be pastoring, and pastoring in Old Hickory added on top of that. My life has been nothing but an adventure since I chose to follow him, and it always requires stepping out into the unknown and letting him form the bridge underneath my feet. That's the follow me part. And so then, at that point in time, Jesus gives that answer to the teacher of the law, and apparently it stumped everybody, or at least it just shut them up, because maybe some of them did realize what he was saying. And that meant maybe this guy that had a nice home was being told, you're going to be on a journey and you may never stay at a nice home again. You might go and do whatever from this point on if you follow me. But we don't see any more interaction between the two of them at this point in time. But we see in the next verse, verse 21, it says, another disciple says to him, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. And this next verse is probably one of the most troubling. Just 2 verses ago, I love the verse because it's so confusing to some people. But the next one is hard to hear because Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their dead, or their own dead. When I read that as a teenager, that seemed like the cruelest answer you could ever give somebody. And I think sometimes people read that and they don't go and learn the true context or look at the meaning of some of the words that are there. And it can leave you with this place of where you sit there and go, okay, how is this the Jesus of love? How is this that Jesus of grace? You know, one minute he's loving somebody and then the next minute it's this and then the next minute it's that. But then to have him sit there and somebody say, oh, but I just want to go bury my dad right quick and then I'm going to follow you. And Jesus instead says, let the dead bury the dead. You're sort of like, where you get whiplash. Where did this Jesus come from? This is like the mean, sarcastic Jesus, which I do believe he's sarcastic sometimes in Scripture, but the mean one, we don't get that. And part of that is we don't understand the full reference and maybe haven't always studied things through, because the reference wasn't for a father that just died. It was for a father that had just begun. The wording that is used is more on a journey of illness. It's almost to say is they've just begun to get sick and I want to follow you, but let me wait around for a while and let's see what happens. Maybe they'll get better, maybe they won't. And then maybe eventually if they don't get better, when they die, then I'll bury them. Then I'm going to come back to you. This could have been a journey that would have been 6 months. It could have been a journey that would have been a year, could have been 5 years or 10 years. And this person is saying, let me take care of life and then I'm going to follow you, Jesus. The man saying, I want to follow you, but let me just hang out where my life is right now. You see, when things in your life are comfortable, it's tough to follow Jesus. You don't want to mess it up. That's exactly where you want to be. It's what we aim for. It's the American dream. It's what all of us long for, is find something comfortable and let's just be comfortable and hang out for a while. And that's really what the person was saying is, I've got this life and it's not perfect. You know, my dad's sick. It's not the perfect situation. And I want to follow you, but let me get this situation taken care of in life and then I will follow you. And the problem that I've seen in my own life is this. When I've had friends that tell me that they're called to follow Jesus, which all of us are, but they're meaning a particular ministry that they're talking about at that time, is what I see is when they put Jesus off, they never come back to follow. That's why you have to respond. You remember last week we talked about the at once and immediately call to follow him, because if you do not do it, you're going to come up with excuses. You're going to find reasons that you can't do what he's asking you to. And here's the thing is, Jesus is not going to ask you cute little fluffy questions. He's going to put you in spaces that you are sitting there going, I have no choice but to trust in him. I have no choice but to have faith in the one true God, because that's the only one that can get me through this situation that I'm facing. This is backed up in the Old Testament. There's a passage of Scripture that tells us about a story of this major man of God by the name of Elijah. And Elijah is looking for somebody. God's laid on his heart that he's supposed to go and find somebody to mentor, and that this person is actually going to even do more incredible things than he has done. And the story is found in 1 Kings chapter 19. And it's only 3 verses that we're going to look at, verses 19 through 21. Verse 19 says, So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. What an incredible name. I get called Fluffy every Sunday by Joe. I would love the name Shaphat. That's the one I'm going to go with from now on. Or if I ever decide to give up preaching and become a white rapper, I want to be Shaphat. That will be my name from then on. And it says, he found Elisha. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Basically, he was calling him to be the person he was mentoring. He was calling him to follow him in ministry. He was calling him to come and do what I do. Follow me and receive. I actually started to just say, and it's accurate, have my burden. We always want to think, have my blessing when we follow Jesus. In reality, he's saying, have my burden. Because when you're doing the things Jesus calls you to do, you're going to hurt. Your heart's going to break when you see the things that break the heart of God. And so he comes and he places this cover, this cloak around him. And it says, Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. So picture in your mind, he's out there, he's working the field. Elijah just walks up and places this cloak around him. Elisha understands, hey man, he's calling me to follow him. And he turns around and Elijah's already started walking away. Basically saying that moment that I'm telling you, that immediately, that at once, he just put the cloak on him and left, and expecting the kids right behind him. He doesn't think he's going to take care of life, grow up, go to seminary, go do whatever he needs to do. He thinks, hey, I put the cloak on him. When I turn around, I better hear his footsteps right behind me. Sort of like Jesus wants from us, immediately following. So Elisha sees that he's gone. He leaves the oxen. He runs after Elijah and he says, let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. And then Elijah's call back to him. I hear his pain. And probably, especially, I think of the youth ministry. Phil and I met working in youth camp back in 90, 91, something around that. So it's been quite a while doing it. And it's a pain that I hear in Elijah's voice when he says this next sentence. He says, go back. What have I done to you? That's an odd thing. He just walked up. He placed this mantle, this blessing on him. He's placed this on him. And then he walks off thinking he's going to follow him. And the kid just comes and says, let me go say goodbye to mom and dad. And he breaks down. It's just like Elijah just snaps and says, just go back. What have I done to you? It's like that moment when you choose to follow Jesus and God opens your eyes to really what's going on around you and what's happening spiritually around you. And then you have this moment that you say, yeah, but I think I want to go back to this. You would almost rather, when you're the preacher, the teacher, or the person that's making disciples of people, that you're almost like, man, I almost wish I'd never introduced you to Jesus, than to have me have the heartbreak of watching you turn back and go back. It's a heaviness of, what have I done to you? I opened your eyes to something, but now I'm watching you sit there and be conflicted between the two. Were you almost better off sometimes ignorant? I don't really believe you're better off ignorant, but reality, that's honestly what he's saying, is just like this of, what have I done to you? I just told you to follow me. Now go out and I'm going to train you and you're going to have the blessing of God. You're going to be this incredible prophet, do incredible things for God, but you want what your past is too much. So what did I do even choosing you? Why did I even bother? I'm now going to tear your heart. And here's the reason why. Once you've heard the call of God to follow you, you will be miserable unless you're following him. It's the reason why so many people that have given their lives to God and they choose not to continue following in that path get so heavy back in things that they were involved in before. The drugs, the alcohol, the sex, and they're trying to numb the things from really what they're doing is they're trying to numb that pain of they know they're not following Jesus. They're going to be miserable the rest of their lives until they finally follow him. So then we see in verse 21, it says, so Elisha left him. The prophets just looked at him and said, what have I done to you? And so he just leaves him and he goes back. And I imagine in Elijah's mind, he's going, I knew it. The kids just quit on me already. Probably turned around and started walking off. But instead we see Elisha. He took his yoke of oxen and he slaughtered them. That thing he was using to work the ground, to make money for the family, probably raise up crops to feed the family, he slaughtered them. And then, to take care of his family, he burned the plowing equipment and he cooked the meat. It says to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his attendant. Basically, he knew as long as he still had all that oxen there and he still had those plows there, he would always be tempted to go back and help take care of his family. And so he had to do much like what Cortez asked of his people. When he said burn the ship, he says got to burn the plows. And so we need to start asking ourselves, are we going to finally realize there's never going to be the right time in our minds to follow Jesus? There's always going to be something that we're going to want to take care of. We're always going to find some excuse to make. There's going to be something that we're going to want to finish. And whatever it is that's holding you back needs to be burned. Whatever it is in your life. And we've got varied age groups in here. And some of y'all could say, yeah, but what it could be? I don't know. But until you take your last breath, you still have a call to follow him. You still have a ministry. You still have a purpose. And if you're not doing it, something's holding you back. Burn it. Follow him. It's going to be painful. It's going to be a tough decision. But if you do not burn it, you will not follow because you'll always be drawn back to the thing that you've left. You've got to burn that sin, leave it behind. Maybe it's that relationship that has been destroying you or whatever that excuse is. Stop giving excuses. You hate it when younger kids do it to you? Stop doing it to God. And when you hear the call to follow Jesus, you must respond. And in reality is you're going to respond. When you hear the call of Jesus, you're going to respond. Your response is, do you follow him or do you not? It's a response either way. You're responding to the call, but what is your choice? Follow him, or are you just going to put it off? Because if you're the one that's putting it off, doing whatever it is, and if you're asking yourself still, I don't know what I'm called to do, listen. Listen to his voice. He's speaking to you. You've just got to hear him. And if you keep putting it off, I'm going to tell you now, the day's never going to come that you're going to follow. It's never going to get here. There's always going to be something else. You got to burn the plows. You got to burn the ships. Whatever it is in your life, no matter how painful it is, burn it. It's simple, and this is why I don't spend a lot of times doing really big altar calls. It's because we were talking about this last night. A lot of us grew up with really good altar services when somebody makes you feel really, really, really guilty, and then you have to rush to the altar to not feel guilty anymore. In reality, if you go back and read the words of Jesus, you never see him do that one single time. It's just a simple call, follow me. Oh, you're sinning? Stop your sin. Go a different direction now. Believe in me. That's it. So right now, I want us to pray. I'm telling you, we're going to beat the Baptist to Shoney's if there was Shoney's around here. We still got one, and we're holding it out. Really, for me, our altar time is not as much an altar time, even though our altars are always open here. And as I tell you repeatedly, we are nothing but a bunch of messed up people here, all that are in need of a Savior. And so you're no different than us, no matter what situation you find yourself in life. And we will gladly, Tommy and myself, we'll come and Phil, we'll come to the altar and spend some time pray if you want to. But the altar calls to me have been a little bit different with this. Is it is more, we need some reflection. We need to think. Because if you're not being still, you're not hearing him speak to you. And it may be a simple thing. I know Candy last week expressed to us after church, she in text messages with Kimmy and everything, is just simple. In the time of reflection, she heard God speaking to her, and she realized, hey, I was missing this on this one part. I wasn't catching a bigger picture on some things. And during that time of just being quiet, she heard the voice of God, and he showed it to her. I'm not worried about, are you up here? I'm worried about, are you hearing? So let's take some time. I want you to pray, reflect. If you want to come to the altar because you pray easier there or it feels more sacred to you, do it. Come to the altar. If you want one of us to pray with you, just say, hey, come pray with me. We'll be glad to do it. But let's take the time and let's reflect for a few moments.